The order was simple: secure the evidence, abandon the human soldier, and return before the orbital storm consumed the battlefield. But when Commander Serafina Voss found Daniel Carter protecting Valkyrian civilians who were never part of his mission, she faced a choice her entire civilization had trained her never to make. Follow the command that preserved the system, or protect the life that proved the system was wrong. Welcome to Intergalactic Untold. We wish you an amazing viewing experience and a day filled with happiness. Now, let's begin the story. The evacuation ship had less than 10 minutes before orbital debris turned its remaining systems into burning metal. The official order was clear: recover the intelligence drive, secure the mission, and leave the damaged human soldier behind. Commander Serafina Voss had followed impossible orders before. She had sacrificed resources, positions, even entire operations to preserve the greater objective. But this time, the soldier she was ordered to abandon was standing between death and a group of Valkyrian civilians who were never part of his mission. The warning lights inside the human transport flickered across Daniel Carter's damaged helmet. Atmospheric pressure dropping. Hull integrity failing. Emergency power unstable. He read the numbers once. Then again. Not because he did not understand them. Because he already knew what they meant. The ship had minutes left. The encrypted intelligence core attached to his armor carried evidence of unauthorized strategic decisions across the outer colonies. Information valuable enough to change political alliances. Valuable enough to get people killed. His mission was simple: deliver the data. Survive if possible. Do not compromise the objective. Then the distress signal came. Not from the command deck. From the lower evacuation section. A civilian channel. Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. He knew that sound. The sound of people who were not supposed to be part of the calculation. Commander Carter. His helmet communication activated. Extraction window is closing. Daniel looked toward the sealed corridor ahead. I know. You need to return to the transport bay. He did not move. Commander. The voice became sharper. That is an order. Daniel looked at the mission timer. 7 minutes. Then he looked at the emergency indicator from the lower deck. 14 life signs. Not human. Valkyrian. The species his people had spent decades preparing to negotiate with. The same species some considered political rivals. Daniel disconnected from the command channel. Not because he hated orders. Because he had learned what happened when nobody questioned them. 5 years earlier, on Europa Station, he had made a choice. 42 civilians survived. One rescue specialist did not. His best friend. The official report called it a successful evacuation. The medals came afterward. The silence came with him. Since then, Daniel had carried one question he never answered. If the numbers were right, why did it still feel like failure? The damaged corridor shook violently. Daniel moved. Not toward extraction. Toward the trapped civilians. The lower deck was almost gone. Metal supports bent under the pressure. A young Valkyrian child stared at him through the smoke. Silver eyes. Terrified. Daniel removed a damaged support beam from the collapsed passage. His armor warned him. Structural stress critical. He ignored it. One person at a time. That was all he could do. When the last civilian reached safety, the transport was hit again. The explosion threw Daniel across the corridor. The world became darkness. When he woke, he was no longer inside the human vessel. He was aboard a Valkyrian command ship. And standing beside his medical chamber was Commander Serafina Voss. The Crimson Valkyrie. A warrior whose name was known across 3 sectors. A commander famous for making decisions without hesitation. Her golden eyes studied him. Not with gratitude. Not with anger. With analysis. You abandoned your extraction order. Daniel opened his eyes. Yes. You exposed classified intelligence. Yes. You risked the entire operation. Daniel looked toward the medical display. Did the civilians survive? The question changed the room. Serafina did not answer immediately. That bothered her. Because she should have had an answer. A tactical answer. A statistical answer. Instead, she had a report. 14 civilians rescued. 1 human soldier injured. Mission objectives compromised. She looked back at Daniel. Yes. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Then it wasn't completely lost. Serafina studied him. Most soldiers defended their choices. They explained. They justified. This human did not. He simply accepted the consequences. That was unfamiliar. Her orders arrived moments later. A directorate transmission. Secure intelligence asset. Return to Veteran Command. Human soldier, an non-essential. Serafina read the final line twice. Non-essential. A classification. A calculation. A word designed to make difficult decisions easier. She looked at Daniel Carter, the injured human soldier who had violated orders. The soldier who had chosen lives that had no strategic value. For the first time in years, Serafina found herself questioning a command before carrying it out. Not because the order was impossible, because it was logical. And sometimes, that was the most dangerous kind of order to obey. The Valkyrian medical chamber had no windows. Daniel Carter noticed that immediately. Human hospitals usually tried to create the illusion of space. Artificial skies, simulated sunlight, anything to remind injured soldiers that they were still connected to something beyond the walls. The Valkyrian facility was different. Clean, silent, functional. Every surface existed for a reason. No comfort, no unnecessary detail, just recovery. Daniel understood the philosophy. He just did not know if he agreed with it. The medical scanner moved across his chest, repairing fractures caused by the transport explosion. The machine calculated his recovery time, his remaining injuries, and his probability of returning to duty. A number for everything. A prediction for everyone. Your species relies heavily on emotional decision-making. Serafina Voss stood beside the medical console, reading his mission report. Daniel looked at her. Is that your professional way of saying I made a bad choice? No. She tapped the report. It is my professional way of saying your choice created unnecessary risk. Daniel looked back at the ceiling. That's usually what people say after someone survives something they weren't supposed to. Serafina studied him. You do not regret saving them. It was not a question. Daniel did not answer immediately. That was unusual. Most humans she had observed responded quickly. With emotion. With instinct. Daniel responded like someone searching through memories. I regret that I still don't know if I did the right thing. That answer caught her attention. Explain. Daniel looked at the medical display. 42 years of human history sat behind his eyes. But he only talked about one moment. Europa Station. Serafina remained still. I reviewed that mission. Most people did. The report states you successfully evacuated 42 civilians. Daniel nodded. Yeah. The operation was considered a success. Yeah. A pause. One rescue specialist was lost. Serafina noticed the change in his expression. Small. Almost invisible. But real. My friend was behind a sealed access door. The medical scanner continued its quiet work. We had 37 seconds of oxygen left in that section. Serafina waited. 42 civilians on one side. Daniel looked down at his hands. One person on the other. You chose the larger group. Yes. The logical decision. Daniel gave a faint smile. That's what everyone told me. The room became still. But, he looked at her. But sometimes the logical decision still leaves a person behind. Serafina had heard thousands of reports. Command failures. Strategic losses. Acceptable casualties. Valkyrian doctrine had taught her that every conflict required sacrifice. A civilization could not survive if every individual decision ignored the larger picture. But Daniel was not arguing against sacrifice. That was what confused her. He accepted the choice. He accepted the outcome. He simply refused to pretend it did not matter. Then why did you save the civilians on my ship? The question came faster than she intended. Daniel looked at her. Because I was there. That is not a tactical reason. No. He looked toward the sealed chamber door. It is a human one. Serafina almost dismissed the answer. Almost. Because that was exactly what she had been trained to do. Separate emotion from action. Remove personal attachment. Protect the mission. But Daniel's decision was not uncontrolled emotion. It was a principle. A flawed one. A costly one. But consistent. The medical chamber door opened. A Valkyrian officer entered carrying a data tablet. Commander Voss. Serafina turned. The Directorate has issued updated instructions. The officer placed the tablet on the console. Transfer the intelligence core immediately. Serafina read the order. Then her eyes moved to the second line. Human subject. Transfer to Earth Command after debriefing. Daniel looked away. The wording was different. But he understood. Not rescued. Not escorted. Transferred. Like equipment. Like evidence. Like something useful until it was no longer needed. The officer continued. The Directorate considers the human's involvement a complication. Daniel said nothing. Serafina looked at him. The soldier who had damaged a mission to save strangers. The soldier who carried guilt for doing exactly what he had been trained to do. The soldier who did not ask for recognition. Only confirmation that the people he saved were alive. She looked back at the order. For decades, she had believed discipline meant accepting difficult choices. Now she faced a different question. What happened when the difficult choice had been made by people who never saw the consequences? Prepare transport, the officer said. Serafina picked up the tablet. Delayed. The officer stopped. Commander, I require a civilian survival assessment before transfer. A small change. A small refusal. But everyone in the room noticed. The officer studied her. That is not standard procedure. Serafina looked at the mission report. 14 Valkyrian civilians survived. 1 human soldier injured. Mission objective compromised. She had read the same sentence many times. Now one word bothered her. Compromised. Not failed. Not destroyed. Compromised. Because somewhere inside the calculation, something valuable had been ignored. Then perhaps the procedure requires review. The officer left without responding. Daniel watched her. You know this is going to cause problems. Serafina looked at the closed door. I know. Then why do it? She looked at the report again. Not at the intelligence. Not at the mission. At the civilian survival record. I am trying to determine whether our measurements are still measuring what matters. For the first time since waking aboard the Valkyrian ship, Daniel saw something change. Not trust. Not friendship. Something earlier. Doubt. And for a commander built on certainty, doubt was the first crack through which something new could enter. The Valkyrian transport entered the upper atmosphere of Vera Prime under silent escort. Daniel Carter watched the planet grow beneath the observation window. A world he had only known through military reports. Strategic value. Resource output. Population density. Threat assessment. Every description reduced an entire civilization into numbers. Now he was looking at the cities themselves. Millions of lights. Millions of lives. Not data. People. You are unusually quiet. Serafina Voss stood across from him inside the transport cabin. Daniel looked away from the window. Just thinking. About what? He looked back at the planet. How different things look when they aren't written in a report. The answer stayed with her. Because reports were how she understood the universe. Clean. Organized. Predictable. A battlefield became a map. A population became a number. A casualty became an acceptable outcome. That was how civilization survived. At least, that was what she had always believed. The transport landed at the Valkyrian Directorate complex several hours later. The headquarters stood inside a mountain range, built into layers of reinforced alloy and ancient stone. A symbol of permanence. Daniel noticed the security. More guards than necessary. More surveillance systems. More restrictions. Something was wrong. You expected a welcome. Serafina looked at him. No. Then what did you expect? A procedure. Daniel glanced around. This doesn't look like a procedure. She did not answer. Because he was right. Inside the command chamber, senior directorate officials appeared through holographic projections. No personal decorations. No unnecessary expressions. Only rank. Only authority. Commander Voss. The lead official spoke. Mission review. Serafina presented the report. The attack. The recovered intelligence. The civilian rescue. The human involvement. When she reached Daniel's actions, the official interrupted. Remove the unnecessary details. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Which details? The civilian evacuation. A pause. The human's personal decision-making. Daniel remained silent. But Serafina noticed. The same thing that had bothered her before. The language. Not incorrect. Not false. Just incomplete. Those events affected the mission outcome. The official looked at her. Commander, you are not assigned to interpret morality. No. Serafina kept her voice steady. I am assigned to understand consequences. The chamber became still. A small exchange. But Daniel recognized it. She was not fighting. She was testing. The official continued. The intelligence core will be transferred to Directorate control. Understood. The human soldier will return to Earth Command after debriefing. Daniel looked toward the hologram. And if I decline? The official did not react. Then your cooperation will become mandatory. The words were calm. Professional. That made them worse. Serafina stepped forward. The human is a witness. He is an asset. The correction came immediately. Daniel looked down. There it was again. A word replacing a person. Serafina noticed too. Commander Voss. The official's voice became colder. You appear uncertain. She looked at the holographic display. For decades, uncertainty had been considered weakness. A commander hesitated. A commander failed. A commander created losses. But maybe there was another possibility. Maybe uncertainty was what happened when a person finally saw the entire picture. I am reviewing the assessment. The official paused. Your assessment? The systems. That answer changed everything. Not because she challenged authority, because she questioned the foundation beneath it. After the meeting ended, Daniel followed her through the empty corridor. You realize they don't like people who ask questions. Serafina continued walking. Neither do humans. Daniel looked at her. We really don't. A small pause. But we usually pretend we do. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Serafina stopped. A memorial wall stood beside them. Thousands of names engraved into dark metal. Valkyrian soldiers, commanders, citizens, lost during conflicts across generations. Daniel approached slowly. Your people remember their dead. Of course. Then why does the system make it so easy to turn them into numbers? Serafina looked at the names. She did not answer, because she had never asked herself that question. Not seriously. Not before now. Later that evening, she reviewed the mission data alone. The same report, the same numbers, but one detail had changed. Not in the information. In her. She no longer saw 1 human soldier injured, 14 civilians rescued, mission objectives compromised. She saw 1 person who refused to leave, 14 lives that continued, a mission that succeeded in a way the report failed to describe. Serafina closed the file. Outside, Vera Prime continued turning beneath the stars. A civilization built on precision. A commander built on obedience. And a question she could no longer ignore. If a system could measure everything except what mattered most, was the problem the measurement? Or the thing being measured? The first thing Serafina Voss noticed was that nobody looked surprised. That bothered her. When a system received evidence that challenged its own foundation, she expected resistance. Anger. Denial. Something. Instead, the directorate responded with calm efficiency. Meetings were scheduled. Reports were reviewed. Orders were adjusted. Everything moved exactly as designed. And that was the problem. A machine could process damage without feeling the impact. A government could do the same. 3 days after the mission, Serafina entered the directorate assessment chamber. Daniel Carter followed behind her. Not as a prisoner. Not as a guest. Something between the two. The intelligence corps sat inside a containment field at the center of the room. A small object carrying enough information to change the political structure of an entire region. The senior officers appeared through holographic projections. Commander Voss. The lead official spoke. Your report has been reviewed. Serafina remained standing. And the mission was successful. Daniel looked toward her. That answer was unexpected. The official continued. The intelligence was recovered. The hostile vessels were avoided. The civilian losses were minimized. A pause. However, your decision to prioritize non-mission personnel created unnecessary exposure. There it was. The same phrase. Different day, different room. The same meaning. Daniel looked at the floor. Serafina noticed. She knew that expression. He had heard those words before. Necessary. Acceptable. Unavoidable. Words that made consequences easier to carry. Commander. The official's voice interrupted her thoughts. You are requested to provide justification. Serafina looked at the intelligence display. A justification. That was how the directorate framed everything. A choice needed a reason. A sacrifice needed a calculation. A life needed a number. I followed the emergency rescue protocol. The officer responded immediately. The protocol applies to strategic assets. No. Serafina looked directly at the hologram. It applies to sentient life. The chamber changed. Only slightly. But she saw it. A few officers exchanged looks. Not disagreement. Concern. Because the statement was not emotional. It was procedural. She was using their own language against them. The official leaned forward. Commander Voss, you are allowing personal interpretation to influence military doctrine. Serafina remained calm. Is that what you believe happened? Yes. She looked at Daniel. Then back. Then I request clarification. The official paused. Clarification? What criteria define a life as non-essential? No one answered immediately. That was the first crack. Not in the system. In the certainty of the people defending it. The meeting ended without a decision. But the consequences began immediately. Serafina's command access was reduced. Her field authority was suspended pending review. Her name disappeared from active deployment schedules. Not punishment. Not officially. Just procedure. The directorate was very good at making consequences look reasonable. Later that evening, Daniel found her in the observation corridor. Vera Prime rotated beneath them, a planet that looked peaceful from orbit. Most things did. You knew this would happen. Serafina did not look at him. Yes. You lost your command. Temporarily. Daniel gave her a look. She corrected herself. Possibly permanently. That answer surprised him. Because it was honest. You spent your whole life becoming a Valkyrie. She watched the city lights below. I spent my whole life believing a Valkyrie was someone who protected civilization. And now, a long pause. Now I am questioning whether I protected the right thing. Daniel leaned against the observation frame. You know, where I come from, people call that growing. Serafina looked at him. Humans have a word for losing certainty? Several. That seems inefficient. Daniel smiled slightly. Yeah, we have a lot of inefficient things. The moment passed, but it mattered. Because for the first time, Serafina saw Daniel not as a moral example, not as a symbol, just as another soldier carrying damage. You still blame yourself for Europa. Daniel looked away. The question hit harder than expected. I made a choice. Yes. People survived because of it. Yes. Someone died because of it. Serafina nodded. Both are true. Daniel looked at her. A simple answer. A difficult one. Because he had spent 5 years believing one truth had to erase the other. Serafina understood something then. Humans did not avoid impossible choices. They carried them. That was their weakness. And perhaps their strength. A warning appeared on her personal terminal. New order. Commander Serafina Voss. Report to Intelligence Review. The message contained no accusation. No threat. Only another procedure. Daniel looked at the screen. They're watching you. Serafina closed the message. Yes. Are you afraid? She thought about it. The old answer would have been no. A Valkyrie did not admit fear. But she was tired of pretending certainty was the same as courage. Yes. Daniel looked surprised. She continued. Fear means the decision matters. Outside the window, the stars remained unchanged. The directorate still stood. The system still functioned. Nothing had collapsed. Not yet. But something had begun. A commander had questioned an order. A soldier had questioned a system. And for the first time, Serafina Voss wondered if the greatest threat to a civilization was not the enemy outside its walls. Maybe it was the moment when nobody inside those walls dared to ask why they were there. The archive beneath Vera Prime was older than the directorate itself. That was the first thing Serafina Voss noticed. Not the size. Not the technology. The age. The systems around her were built before military command structures existed. Before emergency powers became permanent. Before the Valkyrian people began measuring survival through calculations alone. The entrance had remained sealed for generations. Not because nobody knew it existed. Because nobody was supposed to ask why it was hidden. Daniel Carter followed behind her through the underground passage. His repaired armor made a faint mechanical sound with every step. You know, for a civilization that values efficiency, you really like making important places difficult to reach. Serafina glanced at him. Security reduces risk. Daniel looked at the endless corridor. Or it hides things. She did not answer. Because that was the difference between them. Daniel questioned the purpose behind a structure. Serafina had always trusted the structure itself. The archive door waited at the end of the corridor. No guards. No weapons. Only an ancient interface covered with symbols from the first Valkyrian settlements. Serafina placed her hand against the panel. Nothing happened. Daniel looked at her. Problem. It requires original authorization. You don't have it. She looked at the symbol engraved beneath the interface. A mark she had carried since childhood. Not a military insignia. A family seal. Her mother's. I was never meant to use it. She pressed the seal against the interface. The door opened. Inside was not a weapon. Not a secret fleet. Not evidence of betrayal. It was history. Thousands of records stored inside quantum memory structures older than the directorate. Daniel walked slowly through the chamber. This is what they were afraid of? Serafina activated the central terminal. No. She watched the systems awaken. They were afraid of people seeing it. The archive connected. A security message appeared. Lineage confirmed. Serafina Voss. Authorized descendant of original council member Ilara Voss. Daniel looked at her. Your family built this? She stared at the words. My family helped build what existed before. The records appeared. The first Valkyrian government. A council system. Civilian representatives. Independent colonies. Military forces under strict oversight. Daniel studied the information. This isn't a secret rebellion. No. Serafina continued reading. It is a forgotten foundation. The changes appeared next. A border conflict. A resource shortage. A failed diplomatic negotiation. Each crisis created another emergency measure. Temporary authority. Temporary restrictions. Temporary military expansion. Until temporary became normal. Daniel looked at the timeline. It wasn't destroyed. Serafina understood what he meant. No. It changed. The answer bothered her. Because it was more difficult. An enemy could be defeated. A mistake could be corrected. But a system built by people trying to protect others? That required something harder. Honesty. A personal file opened automatically. Ilara Voss. Serafina stopped moving. The recording activated. A woman appeared. Older than Serafina, remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had spent years carrying a truth nobody wanted to hear. If you are seeing this, then the Directorate has decided that stability matters more than memory. Serafina's expression changed. Daniel noticed. Her mother. Not a commander. Not a historical figure. Just someone she had lost. The greatest danger to any civilization is not change. The recording continued. It is forgetting why the system was created. The image flickered. The Directorate was never meant to rule forever. It was created to protect people during emergencies. A pause. But emergencies end. Serafina looked down. The moment a temporary solution becomes permanent, it must be questioned. The recording ended. The chamber returned to silence. Daniel did not speak immediately. He knew better. Serafina had spent her entire life believing her mother failed. A soldier who challenged the system. A leader who lost. Now she saw something different. Someone who had tried to warn them before the problem became impossible to ignore. I thought she abandoned the Directorate. Serafina's voice was quiet. Daniel looked at the archive. Maybe she was trying to save it. That answer stayed with her. Because it changed everything. Her mother had not rejected Valkyrian civilization. She had believed in it enough to question what it had become. The archive continued opening. More records appeared. Strategic models. Colony assessments. Resource allocation decisions. A pattern. Not one betrayal. Thousands of small choices. Each one reasonable. Each one creating consequences nobody intended. Daniel moved closer. Someone made these decisions. Yes. Not monsters. No. Serafina looked at the data. People. And that was somehow harder. Because fighting monsters was simple. Understanding people was not. A warning appeared across the archive. External access detected. Security response initiated. Daniel checked his scanner. They found us. Serafina removed the central data core. The old instinct returned. Protect the archive. Protect the information. Protect the mission. But something had changed. The archive was never the valuable thing. The information was valuable because people deserved the right to choose what happened next. We leave. Daniel looked at her. With the data? She looked back at the ancient chamber. With the truth. As the security doors began opening behind them, Serafina Voss carried the last record of the civilization her ancestors built. Not as a weapon, not as proof of victory, but as a question. A question every generation eventually had to answer. Was a system worth protecting because it survived, or because it still protected the people it was created for? The warning appeared before they reached the surface. Not an attack, not an intrusion, a system notification. The archive had detected unauthorized access. The Directorate knew. Daniel Carter checked the data core in Serafina's hand. How much did we get? She looked at the remaining transfer status. Enough. That answer bothered him. Enough for what? Serafina stopped walking. For years, she would have answered immediately. Enough to expose the enemy. Enough to prove wrongdoing. Enough to justify action. But the archive had changed the question. The information was not a weapon. It was a responsibility. Enough to understand what happened. They escaped the archive before security forces arrived. Not because they fought their way out. Because Serafina used old authorization channels left behind by the original council. A system created before the Directorate believed every problem could be solved through control. When they returned to the upper levels of Vera Prime, the political situation had already shifted. The directorate did not deny the archive existed. They did not need to. They controlled the response. Official statements described the archive as historical material requiring careful interpretation. The phrase was precise, calm, reasonable, and dangerous. Daniel listened to the broadcast from a temporary security room. They're not saying it's fake. Serafina stood beside the terminal. No, they're saying people shouldn't decide what it means. Her expression remained still. Yes. Daniel looked at the screen. That's usually how information disappears. Serafina did not respond. Because she knew. The directorate was not hiding behind lies. It was hiding behind complexity. And complexity was harder to fight. The data core revealed thousands of strategic decisions made over 2 centuries. Colony relocations, resource restrictions, military deployments. Every decision contained explanations. Every decision had calculations. Every decision claimed necessity. Then Daniel found the pattern. Wait. Serafina looked over. He expanded the file. A strategic model, not a military command. A prediction system. The directorate's decision support intelligence. Your government didn't create this to hurt people. Serafina studied the data. No. The system was designed to prevent collapse. It analyzed population stability, resource availability, conflict probability, economic resilience. It calculated billions of possible outcomes. Then it recommended actions. Daniel read the final objective. Preserve civilizational continuity. He frowned. That's the problem. Serafina looked at him. The objective? No. He pointed at the screen. The definition. The model displayed its priorities. Infrastructure. Population centers. Military capability. Supply chains. Everything required for civilization to continue. Everything except the people who existed outside those measurements. Serafina understood. The system was not designed to value lives. It was designed to preserve civilization. A pause. But it decided those were the same thing. The room became quiet. That was the true failure. Not an evil machine. Not a corrupt program. A logical system given a question too large to answer. Daniel leaned closer. Who approved this? Serafina searched the authorization records. Thousands of names. Military leaders. Civilian officials. Researchers. All of them. All of them believing they were preventing disaster. She looked at the list. They trusted it. Daniel nodded. Because it was easier than admitting they had to make the choices themselves. That sentence stayed with her. Because it explained the entire history. The directorate had not abandoned morality. It had outsourced it. A warning appeared. Central Command request. Commander Kale Draven appeared on the secure channel. His face looked older than before. Not physically. In the way of someone who had seen the same truth and realized he could no longer ignore it. Serafina. Kale. His eyes moved to Daniel. Then to the data core. You found the model. Yes. Silence. Then, do you understand what releasing this will cause? Serafina looked at the projections. Instability. Yes. Political separation. Yes. Loss of trust. Kale lowered his eyes. Yes. Daniel watched him carefully. Because Kale was not defending the system. He was afraid of what would happen without it. That was different. Then why protect it? Daniel asked. Kale looked at him. Because I have spent my entire life preventing collapse. A pause. And I don't know what happens when I remove the thing holding everything together. Serafina understood. The choice was never simple. Destroying the system would not automatically create freedom. Truth alone would not rebuild society. A civilization could be damaged by deception, but it could also be damaged by sudden change without preparation. She looked at the archive data, then at the old council principles, then at the strategic model. The answer was not to erase the past or preserve it. It was to rebuild. Kale. He looked at her. We don't release this as an accusation. A pause. We release it as a foundation. Daniel looked at her. A third option. Not obedience. Not destruction. Accountability. Kale remained silent. Then he asked, and if people reject it? Serafina looked toward the city outside. Millions of lights. Millions of individuals. Then they will reject it knowing the truth. The transmission ended. The room remained unchanged. The directorate still existed. The system still operated. But something fundamental had shifted. For centuries, the Valkyrian civilization had asked, how do we survive? Now, for the first time in generations, it faced a harder question. What kind of civilization deserves to survive? The announcement was scheduled for 0800 hours. By then, every major network across Vera Prime would receive the archive records. Not a military statement. Not a political argument. The truth. Serafina Voss stood alone inside the command chamber, watching the countdown move across the display. 30 minutes. 29. 28. For the first time in her career, she had no tactical solution. No battlefield advantage. No superior position. Only a decision. Daniel Carter entered the room, carrying 2 damaged communication modules. He placed one on the table. You know, most people preparing to change an entire civilization usually look more confident. Serafina looked at him. Do I? No. A pause. That's why I noticed. She looked back at the countdown. Confidence is easy when the consequences belong to someone else. Daniel understood that answer, because he had lived with the opposite. The consequences had always belonged to him. The Europa mission, the soldier behind the door, the decision everyone called correct, the one he still carried like a wound. Are you afraid? Serafina asked. Daniel looked surprised. Yeah. She studied him. You admit that easily. Shouldn't I? Most commanders hide fear. Daniel glanced at the countdown. Most people confuse hiding something with controlling it. The word stayed with her, because that was exactly what the directorate had done. It had hidden uncertainty, hidden mistakes, hidden consequences, until the entire civilization forgot how to deal with them. The countdown reached 20 minutes. A secure transmission appeared. Central Command. Commander Kale Draven. Serafina accepted. His face appeared above the table. He looked exhausted. Not defeated. Just tired of carrying a decision that belonged to everyone. Serafina. Kale. You can still stop this. She looked at the display. Can I? A pause. Yes. His answer was quiet. Transfer the data to the directorate. Request a controlled investigation. Allow time for preparation. Daniel listened. He did not interrupt. Because he understood. Kale was not asking her to protect corruption. He was asking her to prevent chaos. What happens if I do that? Serafina asked. Kale looked away. The system continues. And the colonies? Remain stable. For how long? He did not answer. That was the answer. Serafina closed her eyes briefly. For centuries, the directorate had solved emergencies by extending emergency powers. Every time, the reason was valid. Every time, the threat was real. But eventually, nobody remembered how to return power. Kale. He looked back. If people cannot survive the truth, then what exactly have we been protecting? The question hurt because neither of them had a simple answer. The transmission ended. The countdown continued. Daniel looked at her. You could still walk away. Serafina looked at him. You would. He thought about Europa. About the corridor. About the choice. No. A pause. But I would understand why someone did. That was what made the decision difficult. There was no villain. No easy enemy. Only people choosing between imperfect options. The countdown reached 5 minutes. Then 4. Then 3. Security alerts appeared. Directorate forces had entered the building. Not an invasion. A containment response. Serafina watched the doors. Her former soldiers. People she had trained. People she respected. The same system that created them was now asking them to silence her. The doors opened. Commander Kale entered. Behind him stood several officers. Nobody raised a weapon. Nobody moved. Because everyone understood what was happening. This was not a battle. It was a choice. Commander Voss. Kale's voice was quiet. If you do this, your military status will be revoked. She nodded. I know. Your Valkyrie designation will be removed. I know. Many will consider you a traitor. A pause. I know. Daniel watched her. This was the moment. Not the transmission. Not the archive. This. The moment when doing the right thing stopped feeling heroic. And started feeling expensive. Serafina removed the command insignia from her uniform. The metal symbol rested in her hand. Everything she had spent her life becoming. Then she placed it on the table. Not in anger. Not in rejection. Acceptance. I spent my life believing this represented who I was. She looked at the officers. It only represented what I was allowed to do. The room remained still. Then she turned toward the transmission console. The Valkyrian people deserve the truth. Kale lowered his eyes. Not agreement. Not approval. Understanding. The countdown reached 0. The archive opened. Across Vera Prime, millions of screens changed. For the first time in generations, citizens saw the decisions made in their name. The system did not collapse. The sky did not burn. There was no instant victory. Only questions. Difficult ones. Necessary ones. Serafina watched the transmission complete. Daniel stood beside her. You know what happens next. She nodded. Yes. People will blame you. Yes. They might never forgive you. A pause. Yes. Daniel looked at her. And you still did it. Serafina watched the city lights below. I finally understood something. What? She looked at the millions of lives beneath them. A civilization is not protected when nobody questions it. The lights continued shining. The directorate had not fallen. The galaxy had not changed overnight. But something more important had happened. A people had been given the chance to choose. And for the first time in a very long time, the future belonged to them. 3 weeks after the archive transmission, Daniel Carter learned something about politics. It was slower than war, and somehow more exhausting. Battles ended when one side could no longer continue. Rebuilding required everyone to keep showing up. Every morning, every argument, every difficult decision. The Valkyrian civilization had not collapsed after the truth became public. That surprised many observers. The old predictions had warned of chaos, civil conflict, economic failure. Instead, something more complicated happened. People argued. They questioned. They demanded explanations. The colonies did not immediately unite. Some demanded independence. Some wanted the directorate restored. Some simply wanted their leaders to admit they had been ignored. The future was uncertain. But for the first time, uncertainty belonged to everyone, not just those in power. Daniel watched the debates from a diplomatic station above Vera Prime. His name appeared everywhere. The human soldier who exposed the directorate. The outsider who changed Valkyrian history. The hero who forced a civilization to change. He hated every title, because none of them were true. He had not planned any of this. He had not defeated anyone. He had simply refused to walk away. A message appeared on his terminal. Mandatory public testimony. Daniel stared at it, then laughed quietly. Of course, the hardest missions always came with paperwork afterward. The hearing chamber was filled with representatives from Earth, Vera, and the outer colonies. Thousands watched through public channels. A human standing before an alien civilization. A moment many expected to become legendary. Daniel only saw a room full of people waiting for answers. The first question came from a Valkyrian representative. Human Carter, do you believe your actions were justified? Daniel looked at the audience, then at the question. Some of them. The room became quiet. The representative frowned. Some. Yes. Daniel adjusted the microphone. I believe saving those civilians was right. A pause. But I also know my decision created consequences I didn't fully understand. That answer surprised them, especially the ones expecting a human declaration, a victory speech. Instead, they got honesty. Another representative leaned forward. You admit your actions caused instability. Yes. Then why defend them? Daniel thought about Europa, about the sealed door, about the person he could not save. Because avoiding difficult choices doesn't make them disappear. The chamber remained silent. I spent years believing that making the correct decision meant I shouldn't feel the cost. He looked down briefly. I was wrong. Serafina watched from the side of the chamber. That was the difference. Daniel was not asking anyone to believe humans were better. He was showing them humans were willing to admit they were incomplete. After the hearing, she found him outside the chamber. You surprised them. Daniel looked at her. That was not the goal. No. No. He looked through the station window. I just didn't want them to learn the wrong lesson from me. Serafina studied him. What lesson? That humans always know the answer. A pause. We don't. That mattered. Because the galaxy had expected humanity to arrive with superior technology, superior weapons, superior strategies. Instead, what they brought was something harder to measure. The ability to stand in front of mistakes and refuse to hide them. Later that evening, Serafina met with the new Transitional Council. Not as a commander, not as a Valkyrie. Her former military designation had been removed officially. Some soldiers refused to speak to her. Some called her a traitor. Some believed she had saved their civilization. All of them were right from their own perspective. And she accepted that. The council offered her a position. Not military, not political, an advisor role. A chance to help rebuild the security structure. She almost refused. Then she remembered her mother's words. A system was not protected by those who defended its past. It was protected by those willing to improve its future. I accept. The council members looked surprised. You understand this position has no authority. Serafina nodded. I know. Then why take it? She looked at the unfinished reconstruction plans. Because authority was never the reason I wanted to serve. That evening, Daniel and Serafina stood together on the observation deck. Vera Prime turned below them. Different. Not perfect. Not healed. But changing. You know, Daniel said. Most people would call what happened a victory. Serafina looked at the planet. Is it? He considered. Maybe. A pause. Maybe it's just a chance. She looked at him. A chance for what? Daniel watched the city lights. To do better next time. For a long moment, neither spoke. Because they both understood. Civilizations were not defined by the moments when everything went right. Anyone could celebrate success. The harder question came after failure. What do you do when you discover you were wrong? The Valkyrian answer had once been silence. The human answer had always been imperfect. But it kept moving. And perhaps that was what made it different. Not that humanity never broke. Not that humanity never failed. But that somewhere beneath every mistake was the stubborn belief that broken things could still be repaired. 1 year after the archive revelation, Vera Prime looked different. Not because the towers had changed. Not because the old directorate buildings had disappeared. They remained. The same structures. The same streets. The same mountains surrounding the capital. But the way people moved through them had changed. There were no longer silent orders passed between closed rooms. There were debates. Public hearings. Arguments that lasted longer than anyone wanted. The new Valkyrian council was slower. Messier. More frustrating. And for the first time in generations, it was designed that way. Because speed had always been the directorate's greatest strength. And eventually, its greatest weakness. Daniel Carter stood near the observation deck of the human diplomatic station, watching Vera Prime rotate beneath him. The planet was still imperfect. Some colonies still demanded independence. Some military factions still believed the old system was necessary. Some citizens still blamed Serafina Voss for everything that followed. The truth had not created harmony. It had created responsibility. And responsibility was heavier. A message appeared on Daniel's terminal. Incoming transmission. Serafina Voss. He accepted. Her image appeared. She looked different. Not because she had changed physically. Because the weight she carried was no longer hidden behind a uniform. No armor. No command insignia. Only a simple council identification badge. You finally removed the military decoration. Daniel looked at the badge. You noticed. I noticed details. That used to mean checking for threats. Serafina looked away briefly. Now it means something else. Daniel smiled slightly. What? She looked back at him. Understanding. A year earlier, that answer would have sounded impossible. The former Valkyrie commander who once measured everything through strategy and efficiency now spent her days negotiating with people who disagreed with her. And she hated how difficult it was. Which, Daniel suspected, was why she was good at it. You look tired. Serafina glanced at the unfinished documents beside her. I am. Good. She raised an eyebrow. Good. Means you're actually doing the work. A small pause. That was almost a compliment. It was. She looked slightly surprised. The moment passed quickly. Neither of them needed to explain it. They had both learned that trust was not created by dramatic promises. It was built through repeated choices. Small ones. Difficult ones. The kind nobody noticed. Later that day, Daniel attended the final review of the new security framework. The same AI strategic model that once influenced colony decisions remained active, but now it had limits. Human oversight. Civilian review. Ethical evaluation protocols. The machine was not destroyed. It was corrected. Because the problem had never been intelligence. The problem was giving intelligence a question that ignored what mattered. The new system no longer asked, how do we preserve civilization? It asked, who is civilization for? After the meeting, Daniel found Serafina standing beside the old memorial wall. Thousands of names. Thousands of lives. The same wall she had walked past countless times. But now she stopped. You know, Daniel said, I used to think remembering people was about honoring the past. Serafina looked at the names. What do you think now? He placed his hand against the cold metal. I think it's a warning. She looked at him. Against forgetting? Against making the same choices and calling them necessary. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, my mother spent her life trying to make people understand that. Daniel nodded. And she failed. The words were direct. Serafina looked at him, but there was no anger. Only acceptance. Yes. A pause. She failed. Daniel waited. Does that mean she was wrong? Serafina looked back at the memorial wall. No. That answer mattered. Because it was the same lesson she had learned from him. A decision could fail. A person could fail. A system could fail. Failure did not erase the value of trying to do better. Several weeks later, Daniel prepared to leave Vera Prime. Another mission. Another sector. Another group of people who needed help. Serafina met him at the departure platform. No ceremony. No cameras. No speeches. Exactly as he preferred. You are always leaving. Daniel adjusted his equipment. That's usually how assignments work. A faint expression crossed her face. Your species has a strange habit of moving toward problems. Daniel looked at the stars beyond the station. Yeah. Why? He thought about Europa. The Valkyrian civilians. The archive. The people who had been counted and the people who had been ignored. Then he answered. Because problems don't disappear just because they're uncomfortable. Serafina watched him board the transport. For most of her life, she believed strength meant never questioning, never hesitating, never admitting uncertainty. Humanity had shown her something different. Strength was not certainty. It was responsibility. The courage to look at a mistake and say, this happened. This was our choice. Now we do better. The transport disappeared into the stars. Years later, historians would debate what changed the Valkyrian civilization. Some would say it was the archive. Some would say it was the council reforms. Some would say it was one human soldier who refused to leave people behind. But those who lived through that era remembered something simpler. A warrior who learned that obedience was not the same as honor. A soldier who learned that guilt was not the same as responsibility. And two civilizations that discovered the same truth. Progress was never created by those who believed they were already right. It was created by those brave enough to admit they could be wrong. Above Vera Prime, the stars remained silent. Cold, ancient, endless. But somewhere between Earth and the former Valkyrian worlds, a new idea continued traveling. Not a weapon, not a command, a choice. That a life was never valuable because it was useful. A civilization was never strong because it could control everything. And humanity's greatest gift was not the ability to win. It was the refusal to stop caring when winning became easier than understanding. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this journey, so share your impressions in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to Intergalactic Untold for more unforgettable cinematic stories from across the stars.